So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for today. And depending on where you are in the US, it could be good morning. So we have a very exciting topic. We are going to be talking about time and expense. So our topic today is achieving compliance and best practice in time tracking and expense management. Next slide, please, Chris. I'm going to do a really quick introduction. My name is Bulin Tran. I'm Senior VP of Financial Solutions at JMT Consulting. I'm located in the DMV area, that's the DC area here. I've spent my entire career serving and supporting nonprofits with their back office accounting operations, leveraging financial solutions. And one of the solutions we'll be talking about is DATABASICS. And we have a special guest today joining us, Chris Hartley, VP of Sales with DATABASICS. Chris, maybe you can do a quick intro.
Yeah, thanks, Berlin. And similar to Berlin, I'm based here in the greater Washington, D.C. area. I've actually been with DataBasics going on almost 25 years, and I've known Berlin for almost that entire time. So we've certainly done a lot of work together around this topic of how to certainly help organizations as it relates to what they're trying to do here from a time and expense perspective, and looking forward to sharing some of those insights here over the next 45, 50 minutes or so.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, just a couple of housekeeping things. So if you have questions, please submit your questions in the question box on your control panel, and we will answer them, either during the presentation if I see them, or we'll respond to them at the end of the presentation. And today's recording and slides will be emailed to you following the webinar. This is a CPA credited presentation, so your participation today may earn you one CPE credit. To receive a CPE credit, actively respond to the polling questions. There are three. There are four. You want to respond three out of the four. Complete the survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar and stay on for the duration of the webinar. If you have technical issues, please indicate in the chat or email to the email that's provided right there. So really quick in terms of who is JMT for those who are new to us. So JMT was founded in 1991 to help nonprofits achieve their mission. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and you can see there we are headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee, but many of us work throughout the US. We serve over 2,000 nonprofits across the US and a few in Canada, supporting nonprofits' back office accounting operation with financial systems and accounting services. Next slide, please. All right, so really quick note in terms of what we do from a service standpoint. We implement and support cloud-based ERP solutions, which include Sage Intacct and as well as MIP. We implement and support budget management solutions, and there's a few that we support from that perspective. We provide outsourced accounting services. We also perform accounting operational assessment work as well, and assist with system integration. So these are integrations of, let's say, Sage Intacct with other systems that our clients use, as well as support on the grants management. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a CPA accredited, and so our learning objective for this presentation is to learn how nonprofits can implement industry best practice to enhance financial transparency, accountability, and compliance, and then also to discover how AI-powered time and expense management solutions can help automate compliance, reduce errors, and improve operational efficiency. So now okay, so this is our polling question number one. So certainly for those who need the CPE credit, you want to make sure you respond to that. In the meantime, I think we're going to move forward to the next slide. And I'm going to pass the remainder of this presentation to Chris, who's going to talk to us about best practice.
Sure. Well, thanks, Bulin. And again, Bulin provides you guys some insight as far as JMT DataBasics has a very similar mission, but our focus is really on time and expense reporting, and that's really what we'll talk about as we go through the process here. We do have a polling question up, which we'll put up just as I kind of give it a little more background as far as what we provide out there. This question is really talking about how you're currently managing timesheets. We'll talk about expense reporting later, and we're actually going to spend a lot of time talking about how we put timesheets and expense reporting together into a single platform out there. But as far as data basics, we've been providing time and expense solutions here for the last 25, 30 years or so, really since the first web-based products came to market. Our focus has always been on project-based companies. And so with that being said, obviously a lot of not-for-profits. So what we're looking to do today is to talk about, again, best practices and compliance that can be achieved through the time and expense process. So it looks like that polling question is down. So let's kind of go into kind of those first areas that we talk about, which is kind of common challenges faced by nonprofits. And we see a couple different things that really create some of those common challenges. And again, I don't need to sit and tell you guys where you see those, what those challenges are. But we'll start by, and again, depend upon looking at kind of the survey results, and we'll see those is a manual processes out there. We still see lots of organizations may not have everything manual, but they may still be doing certain aspects of their time and expense and leave process in a manual fashion. And as we look at the challenges or the issues that creates is the first one is it becomes a time-consuming process. In this case, we're talking about time-consuming from a data entry perspective, but it's really time-consuming from every component of that entry, whether we talk about making sure the end user is entering the correct information, making sure approvers are approving information timely, or how that information ultimately ends up in your accounting or payroll system. And as we talk about compliance, who's actually going in there and how quickly can they go in there and create those controls and measures or stop those measures that need to take place. So as we talk about a very high risk of human error, but it's also very costly to an organization to go out and do these processes. And unfortunately, oftentimes because of time constraints out there, it just simply gets passed over by the individual organization. Now, when we talk about those compliances, of course, the difficulty to enforce policies out there. And when we talk about policies today, we're going to talk about policies from a couple different areas out there. We're going to talk about corporate policies. So those may be the rules that you're looking to implement from an individual organization perspective. Then you've got government policies, whether those are federal policies or if you look at individual state rules and regulations or even individual unions out there as we talk about some of the global organizations out there. So when we talk about policies, it really comes into different parts of the organization. And then again, when we look at that compliance, who's able to enforce those policies? How much time and effort does it take? And how easy is it to get to that information? And then really the last piece here, which is multiple solutions. And again, every person on this call probably can recognize that is whether we look about, and we're talking about just time and expense today, but if you look across your entire stack of technology that you're looking at, what solution to use for HRIS, what to use for payroll, what are you using for accounting, what are you using for budgeting, what are you using for leave management, and some of those may be automated, some may be paper. The my assumption is that they're not all talking to each other, and so ultimately what it creates is kind of this fragmented data process, and someone needs to go in there and put all that information together. And if you have fragmented data and it's not coming into a single source, ultimately what you end up with is limited real-time information, or maybe no information at all. Now, again, there are organizations that are able to put this information together. There are third-party technology tools that will put it together, but it's very difficult to go out and maintain multiple systems. Even DataBasics is a software provider out there. We use multiple systems on a day-to-day process, and one of our largest challenges is how do we go out and put all this information together. So what we want to talk about today is how we're able to at least help some of these, kind of combine some of these processes to get them into a better practice for you as it relates to compliance out there. Now, again,
Chris, can
yes,
we go back to the other sliders? A couple of
sure.
comments I just wanted to add to that. So when we talk about, you mentioned about time, consuming data, data entry here. One of the things that you and I spoke about, especially for nonprofits that are grant funded, is the manual process of determining the labor costs. And yes, for folks that are not on electronic timesheets, let's say if they were doing, and there are, I do, there are nonprofits out there that are still managing time in Excel, right?
Sure.
And so, but it's more than just, recording your time, in a system. It's also, if you're grant funded, determining, let's say if you're booking your time on a certain grant, what is that labor, what does that equate to when it comes to labor costs, which is, it's a huge effort, and a lot of folks that are actually doing that, even if they have a timesheet, that timesheet may not be calculating the labor cost, in which case they then have to do it in Excel.
Exactly. And even with very advanced Excel spreadsheets, and trust me, over my time, I've seen some very fancy Excel spreadsheets. Again, and we'll talk about this as we talk about technology out there, is there's always exceptions. And especially if we look at not-for-profits, a lot of times they're capturing time in semi-monthly periods. And unfortunately, if you're doing time in a monthly or looking at a monthly process, not all months match up with the same number as days. So you build a spreadsheet and some months have 30 days, some have 31 days out there. So we'll talk about that. Then you throw holidays in. So if you start doing some of that costing piece, which you're talking about, Boolin, it becomes
Yeah.
quite complex. And again, the exception is always what takes a large amount of time. And that's where you get into the issues of risk and other areas out there as it relates to how you're kind of looking at this data and what data you're able to look at.
Yeah, and since you mentioned about the pay period, the other thing about what I've noticed with some of the nonprofits, when they have when they have operations outside of the U.S. So many times what will happen is in the U.S. they may be semi-monthly, they may be bi-weekly, but in the field office, let's say somewhere in some in Africa or in India, their timesheet may be monthly. So it doesn't align with what's, in the US. And so, having a system like this, that my understanding is you handle both, correct?
That's correct. And
Databases
actually,
handle
I've got a
both.
baby case study at the end. We'll kind of go through that. And actually talks about an international development
Oh,
not-for-profit
that's
out there,
great.
which you may not even seen that slide. But in any case, as it relates to that, but the global brings in a whole nother area out there. And actually, we won't spend too much time talking about it today. I will show you guys some examples, but leave management, which is a kind of a subcategory of time tracking, creates a whole nother challenge out there, especially if you start looking at global environments and how people request time off, what information needs to be provided. So again, manual processes. There's some great Excel spreadsheets out there, and there's some very talented folks that can go out there and manage that data. But what we're going to talk about really is how technology can hopefully streamline that and, again, make it easier for everyone involved in the process. So looking at kind of the elements of compliance, it really brings in a lot of different pieces out there. And I will say, again, if you look at us as an organization, DataBasics works with not-for-profits as hands down the largest group or the majority of our customers out there, but we do deal with other industries. We do see in not-for-profits, they typically have good processes around how they go about managing it. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're using technology out there, but there typically are individuals that are responsible for taking on different components of this process, which we'll talk about things like, again, what's the risk that's out there? What are our policies and procedures? Who puts our policies, procedures together? Is there a committee out there? Is this done by, certain representatives within certain departments out there? And then we start looking at, okay, so once we have rules in place, do the users have access to those rules? How do we enforce those rules? What does the monitoring and audit look like? Is it being done automatically? Is it being done after the fact? Is it being done before the fact? And it really depends upon different organizations. And again, we're kind of going across two different processes here between timesheets and expense reporting. But one of the things we do see with not-for-profits is they oftentimes will implement a pre-trip or pre-travel or a
Right.
pre-expense purchase process out there. And again, when you put it down on paper, it makes a lot of sense and it's very easy to kind of say, hey, these are the rules. But when it's used in practice, it becomes quite complex and quite difficult, especially if you're trying to make purchases in a short time frame. Someone needs to suddenly travel, on Friday, and you're sitting here today, and we need to run it through the proper channels to get approved, and that's taking place through email or even paper out there. It just, again, some of these processes that are, again, written down very well, everyone understands them. It's a very difficult process to ultimately implement. and to enforce out there. And so as we look at this, again, I see a lot of not-for-profits doing a very good job of kind of putting in place what those rules are going to be, and also training their employees on it. But when it comes to really executing on it, that's really where kind of you fall a little short, which kind of brings us to our second polling question. I mentioned we were talking about timesheets, but as it relates to expense reporting, this polling question is really kind of how are you managing that expense report process? And again, I would include things like a pre-trip authorization in that process. Again, maybe it's partially being done manually or done through Excel. In this case, you'll notice we've got kind of a couple covering different examples out there. I look at kind of a paper process. Most folks have moved on from paper process. I think everyone at this point is either using kind of an Excel or a homegrown system, or looking at a third-party tool like a DATABASICS. There are some other tools out there that people are using out there. Or again, you may be using an expense tool from a third-party solution. Bulin mentioned, like Sage Intacct. There are others out there that will also provide an expense reporting platform or a timesheet platform or a third-party payroll tool. Companies like ADP, UKG, Workday, which you may be using for an HRIS, do also have expense reporting platforms out there. So that's kind of the second question as it relates to that manual process. Now, what I wanted to get into is we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that are out there, and again, the process for putting policies and compliances in place. But really, what we want to talk about now here is kind of the importance of effective time and expense management. And it really comes into, again, a couple different areas out there. And when we talk to organizations about this, we're always talking about kind of the different individuals and the role within the organization. So we always talk about the end user out there, we talk about kind of the administrators, and then we talk about the executive team as it relates to that. And really, as you look at kind of the importance of it, it really pertains back to those three groups. The first is, of course, ensuring financial transparency and accountability. So, depending upon the types of projects, jobs, grants that you're working on as a not-for-profit, and where those are being funded and who's funding them, it asks, there needs to be, again, accountability and transparency to see where your labor and expense costs are going. The second piece there is maintaining compliance within those organizational policies and regulations. And as I talked about, is those policies may be coming from the organization. Things like, hey, this is the amount of money you're allowed to spend per diem per day as it relates to travel and meals or lodging, or that may be coming from some other rule, governmental and policy enforcement as it relates to how your time hours are done. And then the last piece there is kind of optimizing these resources so that you're having operational efficiency. So if you look at this, really what we're talking about here is making sure that you have a nice, easy process for the end users. You're still making sure that you're enforcing all the controls and compliances that you want. So you allow the technology to go out there and to basically enforce those policies, make it easy for the end user. And if you can do that, you put on top of it a nice reporting platform that will allow those folks in the organization need to get to the data to get to data quickly. And when we talk to organizations, we always say, hey, there's kind of a few different groups that we're trying to appease. We look at kind of finance and accounting as the folks that are trying to make sure the controls and compliances are in place, but they're making sure that the end users have the best possible path and process to enter it, and that they're also making sure that they can get to all the data out there. And so when we talk to organizations, we recognize that if we can make kind of those three groups happy and make sure that each one of them is getting their job done properly, that we should be able to achieve a best practice and, of course, the most efficient process possible. And that even comes into things like, we talk about things like from the end user side, a missing timesheet report. Again, when you look at organizations that are using a paper process, this simple ability to notify a user to say, hey, by the way, let's say, for example, Monday's a holiday here in the US, please make sure you need to get your timesheet in by then. Or please make sure you're not putting in time on Monday when you actually show up to work on Tuesday. And there's some little things you can do, like populating, again, to talk about, what you're going to have Memorial Day, to populate that hour right into your time card so people don't suddenly get to the end of the week and realize, why do I only have 4 days of hours in here when there's 5 days in the timesheet? So there's little things that are being done there to make life a little easier on everyone involved in the overall process.
And Chris, it's not just the finance and accounting team being happy knowing that the policies are being enforced properly, but I'm sure the auditors are also happy.
Correct. And there's tools, and we can even show there are tools out there as it relates to audit. So, when we talk about audit out there, and again, different people use the term audit in a different fashion out there. And again, it applies to different folks. But I mentioned earlier, we're talking about kind of like if you look at an expense report and making sure receipts are in. There are managers and accounting and finance people that are ensuring that employees are submitting their receipts. We're going to show how technology can ensure that the receipts are in there and actually read that data out there. But what happens when someone wants to come in, the auditors come in, 6 months later and want to be able to quickly and easily get to that data to see, you know, who approved this? Why were there modifications made? Were there modifications made? What were those modifications? All of that data should be very easily accessible, and there are tools that make it so that you can get to that data. Or again, someone just wants to see all the airplane purchases that may be greater than $1,000, or all the purchases that where someone may have booked in a different class than they're supposed to. So again, there are certainly tools out there that will allow you to get to that information quite quickly. So, what are the best practices for implementing a time and expense tool? And this is a process that we will always go through within an organization out there. And really, kind of the first or the top of the page you look at that is probably the most time consuming one, because it's really where an organization needs to sit down and to look at, again, what are the policies they need to be abiding for? What are the controls they're trying to put in within the organization? And then how do they impact the individual users? How do we outline and document this information so that everyone can see that? And then from there, what we would say is let's figure out how we can automate these processes and controls. Bulin and I have kind of been talking about this as we've been going through this conversation. But things like missing timesheet reports. How do we automate credit card reconciliations? How do we ensure compliance that employees are entering their timesheets in on a daily basis? How do we ensure that people are approving timesheets? How do we make sure people aren't approving their own timesheets? Those sort of processes, almost everything that we've talked about here today can be automated and implemented into an application. How do we ensure people aren't submitting duplicate credit card transactions or duplicate receipts out there? And again, it's things that if you're using a manual process or a paper process, it's very tough to look across the database to see that information out there. So we want to make sure that we have clear processes. We want to make sure that we're going to automate those processes and controls. And then what we want to do is make sure that they're easy to use. I tell people stories all the time that, when we first started implementing these applications, 20, 25 years ago, we would talk to a finance and accounting group or executives, and they'd get so excited about these applications. They're like, look at all the things we can do. We can lock the users down. We can make sure they never spend one dime more than we want. We can make sure they have receipts for transactions that are $3 and not. And what happens is the users would reject the application because they thought it was cumbersome. And so that's one of the things that we really look to do is to make sure that not only are we going to make sure we enforce those policies because we recognize that that's usually why you're putting a tool here in place, but we want to make sure that it's as easy as possible. In this day and age, if you look at things like mobile applications, and again, I don't need to tell the folks here on this phone call, if you look at how far your mobile applications have come since you first used your first iPhone or Android phone out there, the same thing goes for these time and expense applications. It's got to be super easy to enter this data. It's got to be super easy to approve this data. It's got to be also easy to go out and make modifications. So once we have these processes in place, the next thing is talk about integration. And again, Bulin talked about how JMT works with organizations to implement accounting platforms, but also to bring in some other third-party tools like budgeting tools. We would say, if you look at time and expense, it has to be integrated with what you're trying to do here from an accounting and payroll process, but it also has to be good integration. You've got to make sure, like, for example, we were talking about it, which I'll get to this case study here in a minute, talking about like a global organization. Global organizations have folks all over the world, and odds are the user that is sitting in a country in Africa it probably has a different project or fund structure that he or she's looking at than someone sitting here within North America. And so the applications that you're implementing should make it so that if you have a project in Africa, those folks there should only see those projects and grants they're working on, while the folks in North America should see the projects and grants they're working on. So it's important that once again you put these processes in place, that you create integration so that what ultimately happens is the user's just simply entering in the most basic data you need them to provide. The folks in accounting and finance are just simply reviewing exceptions because the application will spit at them. This is what needs to be reviewed. And then once it's reviewed, it'll seamlessly move over into the accounting and payroll platform. And so the total time and effort taken should be absolutely minimal. And then again, once that data sits within those applications, you should be able to get to quick and easy reports. And as we were talking about on the prior slide about audit, if you want to go back out and say, hey, what happened in 2024, or where was this transaction, or what credit card transaction had never been mapped to an expense report, you can quickly and easily get to that data. And so you look at kind of those top four pieces, that's really kind of the whole process of saying, hey, what are we going to try to accomplish? How do we automate it? How do we make it easy? And then how do we make it work with our systems? And then really the last one is new technologies out there. Again, I've been working with companies from a time and expense perspective for 25 years. It's very different today, what we're able to do within these platforms from what we did when I was first working with organizations. Back then, the web was brand new. So everyone was excited the fact that you could just simply effectively email or move timesheets or expense reports through the web to be approved. This day and age, my expense reports get automatically created for me. The system will take my credit card transactions, it'll take my receipts, it'll match it up. And as long as I'm quick and diligent, actually, I don't have to do that. If I use tools like Lyft or Uber, it'll automatically drop right into my platform. It'll get matched to my corporate credit card, and it'll basically create my expense report for me. And all I need to do is go out there and to add information like a project or if I was entertaining someone out there. So the technology has come a long way and it continues to come a long way. And that's why we're going to talk about really this next piece here in a few minutes about AI, which is, again, we all are seeing AI and chat out there as it relates to every component of our life, whether we're Googling things or, if you're trying to go out and get assistance in creating an outline or writing something. We're going to show you how AI is being used within a time and expense platform here in a few minutes. And I've got a quick demo here at the end just to show you some of those details. But go ahead, Billy.
A quick comment on just as an FYI to those that are listening to this, and that is, we do, as we're a Sage partner, right? I mean, we for lack of better word, we sell and we implement, we support Sage and Tech, and we work with a number of ISV, DataBasic being one of them. And I will say that there are quite a good number of expense management solutions out there. So is Timesheet. But when it comes to integration, they're not all the same. Right? Every solutions integrate slightly differently. And one of the things I would say a pat in the back for you guys is the dynamic dimensional relationship, right? And to if you that DataBasics is able to pulled over from Sage that where clients may set up those dimensional relationship where a grant, maybe a program works with these grants but not these grants, and to be able to pull that kind of information goes it goes along with the ease of use. You don't have to look at the whole list of grants. So if you select a specific programs, it kind of knows on what's the right combination. So I just wanted to mention that that's huge.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. We talk about kind of here actually on this slide, talking about outlining clear and comprehensive policies, and I'll kind of relay that back to when we see organizations doing procurements for tools like this. What you said, Boodlin, there is very important. We often tell people to get very detailed in the types of questions they ask. I think I've got a slide here at the end talking about kind of how we go about this process. But again, because if you ask questions like, do you have a mobile app? Most organizations have, or most solutions have a mobile app, or can you integrate? And most people do integration. You really got to get a little more granular because, again, the way people integrate data or the way mobile apps work is often very different. You can check the box that yes, it does it. And again, if you look like compliance is another one, as we talk about like audit trails, does it have audit trails out there? But we always tell people to get very detailed in the sort of questions that you're asking the vendors because, again, everyone can answer the question yes to those sort of questions, but when it comes into really the details as far as how it works, it varies greatly. And again, the case study I want to talk about, someone was actually utilizing a different time and expense platform, and the integration was effectively one direction. So that basically meant they
Oh,
could populate data, but they couldn't get it the other way. And again, as we talk about modern technology, again, integration is something that's come a long way. And We were talking a few slides before about having multiple systems in place, and that's why I said there are organizations that have been able to go out and put all this data into single platforms. There are reporting tools, Power BI, which again, I'm sure some folks out here are using. You can certainly go out there, and if you've got some smart folks on staff, you can take and pull all this data into a single platform out there, and it's fantastic. But if you're not as savvy or if you don't have the resources on site to be able to do that, we would say it may make more sense to go out and look at some of these tools that you can put some of these processes together, which
We
kind of
do
leads
have two
me.
questions out there.
Okay.
So how does DataBasic handle the percentage of effort reporting for salary staff working more than a standard 40 or 37.5 hours work week on
Yep.
multiple federal cost reimbursement grant?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we were kind of talking about fancy spreadsheets earlier, and we were saying how it can't pick up, sometimes that's where you get challenged. So within our application, we basically have a concept of a standard working day. And again, so some of those work weeks, so some of those, and again, I'll make an assumption they're probably in a semi-monthly period. If not, it doesn't really matter. But we basically have the concept of a standard working day. An organization would determine what that is, 7.5 hours, 8 hours, whatever it may be out there. And then basically what we will do is look at the end of the reporting period, whether it's a week or it's a bi-weekly or semi-monthly period, even monthly, we'll basically go out there and create whether you call it standardized total time accounting in the government contracting space, we'll basically go out there and to create that percentage of effort out there. And again, you may also pull out things like if there's let's say there's PTO in there. So it just depends upon what takes place in there. But the system basically will bring it all back to a day. And again, if you've got someone who works, let's say 120 hours in what should be a 100 and X hour week, it'll reckon or reporting period. It'll pick that up and automatically calculate that percentage for you.
That's great. And then the second question is, how does DataBasic addresses the federal SSL salary and related fringe is only reimbursable up to a certain amount per employee based on an annual limit established by the feds?
Yeah. So again, as we look at different pieces out there, it's just a matter of implementing that within the application. So what we're able to do is basically build as it relates to these processes, and without going into too much detail or going kind of too far in, and we can certainly follow up, provide some additional details out there. The application has the ability for us to go out there and enforce policies based upon users, projects. um, departments and basically go ahead and build those limits in there. I probably won't have too much time to go into it, but things like looking at like per diems and spend limits, and we do this a lot with healthcare and pharmaceutical organizations as far as limits out. It's just a matter of basically building these policies into the application to track, and then what the time frame is that it needs to be tracked within that individual process. But again, we'll certainly follow up here after this call and can provide some more details to that specific question.
Thank you.
Which kind of leads me into we've been kind of talking about, how do third party solutions help? And again, we've kind of been leading up to this. What we provide out there is a time and expense solution. Again, what we typically see, and when we talk about time tracking, and again, for the individuals on this call, when we look at time tracking, there's different reasons they're capturing time. We have some folks that are out there and actually billing time back to a project, a grant, a fund. We have others that are just simply trying to track their labor cost back against a grant fund. We have others that also have a payroll component. So not everyone is, I'm assuming most of the folks here, probably the higher percentage of probably are salaried folks, but we still do see individuals where they have hourly individuals. And so at the end of the day, they want to be able to make sure that within this time card, they can quickly and easily capture that data and then push it wherever it needs to be pushed. Again, whether it's a payroll component, an accounting or a costing component, or a billing component, that data can be moved different places. On the expense reporting side, the same sort of process out there. We want to make sure that we provide a quick and easy process for users to capture receipts, which is the supporting documentation. It's hands down the most time consuming component of what we do on the expense reporting side. But what we can also do is go out and automate things like government per diems. Not all not-for-profits use them, but for those that do use them, we can implement and pull in the government, the GSA per diem tables in there. So if you've got a user who's going to Tulsa and we want to have one meal rate versus someone who's going to Miami, you can easily do that. And that would also include enforcing any sort of policies for, first and last day travel, or what happens if someone leaves at 10 o'clock at night, or maybe you guys give someone a flat per diem based upon the per diems, others want actual. So we see organizations look for support in different ways, and what we try to do is to make sure that the application will go out there and to automate that. And then again, give you a single application to do that. So a single tool out there allows a single point of integration, a single support, and a single place for the user to enter in all of those details as it relates to a grant or fund. And what that's going to do is give you a quick and easy way to report upon information. And again, in this case, you're looking at some screenshots, a quick and easy way for a user to enter this information within the solution. Now, we've been talking about kind of, again, there's a lot of specifics within here, and I don't want to go too much into that today. Really, what we're talking about is kind of the compliance component of this and the best practices around that. But the technology piece is something there that we talked about here a couple minutes ago, and that's really looking at how AI is enhancing compliance out there. And again, from our perspective, which is just looking at time and expense perspective, we look at AI doing a number of items out there to help with compliance. The first is natural language queries. So instead of you in finance or accounting or audit or some other area having to go out there and to go into Power BI to build a report, or go into the accounting system reporting tool, or even go back into your old email history to find some information, you can very easily and quickly open up this chat and go in and build a query to say things like, whose timesheet is still outstanding right now. And it will go out and very quickly give you this information. The next area out there is in support. For those of you that are managing these systems and trying to implement controls, how do I build this policy? How do I change the audit process? An AI tool will allow you to very quickly go out there and to ask that question and provide that information. But going beyond that, it gets into some more of these items as you look at predictive analytics for forecasting, and then the automation and creation of expense reports and timesheets. We're seeing more and more organizations that are coming to us to say, hey, look, I've got these users, and again, I see it all the time in not-for-profits. I've got these users that do the same thing every week. Why do they have to come in here and rebuild this time card? So can we go out there and have the time card go out there and do it on its own, but when there are exceptions, to go in and basically override those exceptions. And again, I'm not saying that's perfect for everyone, but it certainly is an option out there. I gave you the story earlier about how I do my expense report, which is basically I don't do much, because this day and age, it'll almost automatically create the whole process for me. But it even gets to the point now that it'll even make assumptions for me. It recognizes that a receipt that comes over from Hertz is a car rental. So I don't need to go in there and tell it that. It recognizes it, and it'll continue to learn as I go through the process out there. But the big thing from our side here, as I mentioned earlier, is embracing technology, but recognizing that AI is here. It's again, it's part, I will admit, as I look at it with like Google and even Microsoft and some of these things, it's taken me a while to kind of start to get around to it. I'm on the older side. I noticed the younger folks in the office certainly embrace it more than me. But again, it's here, and we should embrace it and see what it can do to really help you. And again, because a lot of us have been doing things the way we've been doing it for a long time, but that's certainly changing. And the folks that we're working with who are coming up the ranks are going to certainly look at different tools out there for us to go out and to support this process. And again, in just a few minutes here, I'll jump in and we'll show you a little bit of how this, what the AI tool looks like within DataBasics, and how we're able to run some pretty cool queries to get to some information that, again, would take me a few minutes, if not more, to go out and find that information there within that. So with that, I've got a question here for everyone, which is, has your organization, have you started to look at deploying AI within your overall technology stack? And again, we see it everywhere. I mentioned, Copilot there from Microsoft. I know Bulin works with Sage Intacct. I think theirs is called Copilot as well.
Yeah.
I know if we look at Google and other things that you guys have in your search queries, so just curious if you guys are looking for to deploy AI from that perspective.
I will say AI is fairly new, I think, for everyone, you know. Um, uh, on the Sage side, I think, they released AI a couple of months ago, and then I think with the last release, the R2, they've made some updates to it, but it is very new.
Yeah. Well, and I'll talk about this when we look in the demo. I mean, the challenge with it is it's such a vast world. And, if you look at the way your most of your reporting tools are built. And again, I can say this for everyone on the call, they're built on a very specific database, and the data structure is, and again, when you kind of open up the world for the application to go look at, it has to be trained. And
Yeah.
again, if you think, not everything is, the way we speak, which is where you're ultimately trying to get is, the way you may ask a question may be very different from the way I ask a question. And so that's really one of the challenges that we talk about with AI is how do we bring it together? But again, we'll get into this in the demo. The neat part about it and where we see it moving is moving beyond the database. The queries that I'm going to show you here in a few minutes are specific to what we're doing within time and expense. But what's going to be neat is as you can allow it to start to go to other systems and processes there within your organization and to put that information together. So again, it's not specific to one sort of system or process there within your organization.
Yeah. And I'm super excited, to see how some of these publishers like Sage could take AI to the level where, really help the non-finance people, right?
Yeah.
So non-finance people, you're dealing with an accounting system. So how is it helping those non-finance people to really understand how their grants or how their program is performing, without looking at a set of numbers?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I've kind of referenced smart people in this conversation today, and kind of looking at again. And this goes back to a data basics life lesson is, when we first started deploying these applications years ago, we built this very actually I should say we OEM'd a very heavy third-party reporting tool, and it allowed someone in a demo to come in, and we would again bring someone in, a sales engineer, to a demo, and it would you could wow the pants off people because it could do everything for them. But what we saw is that in reality, had very, 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 it was very much underutilized because the folks that were going in to try and build reports didn't want to slice and dice a cube. I mean, it just
Yeah.
it was more, and what they wanted was quick and easy data. And
Yeah.
so years ago, we went and kind of took and built a reporting platform that was again much easier to use, allowed you to get right to the data because we knew that was the data they wanted to get to, and again do that. What I'm going to show you here in a few minutes is exactly what you're talking about there, Bulin, which is instead of me even having to touch the reporting tool, I can go out and ask for the data that I want to get to, and I don't have to touch the thing, which allows me to do, but allows you to do complex queries without having to go in there and do that. But again, it kind of comes back to kind of how people sell software and then the actual how's it actually used. And reporting is a massive area out there that, again, is often underutilized by organizations out there. So with that, and again, kind of leads a little bit to kind of steps to implementing best practices out there, which we've kind of talked about this earlier, which is really going out and looking at your processes out there, figuring out what can be improved. And again, most organizations do a lot of things well, but there's always starts to be little things. And that's one of the things that we like to do with organizations. And I know it's one of the things you guys do with organizations, kind of sit down and say, hey, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? Because again, working with a professional to go out and to identify ways to better streamline, and there may be things that you're not even thinking about, that how do we go out and streamline those? So we certainly will work with someone from there. Again, you then make sure you select an application that's going to work within your overall umbrella. And then once it's up and running, we've talked about this before, is making sure the staff understands the rules and there's an easy way for those rules to be put out to the users. One of the things that we always say is that if the technology can do that, that's obviously the best possible way. So if a user again, doesn't know when the timesheet's supposed to be submitted, if the application can tell them when to submit it, that's the easiest way. So even without them having to know what the corporate policies are, let the application go out there and tell them those rules. And so again, kind of talking about, we've kind of referenced this earlier. Bulin talked about kind of global organizations, but kind of just a quick overview. This is we had a case study here with not a nonprofit that works in the international development. This organization is actually based in the greater Washington, D.C. area, but they had a global workforce. And that's, for those of you guys that do have global workforces, I don't need to tell you the complexities that come around that. The first comes into, again, most often within your accounting system, you may be deployed in a multi-entity or multi-company environment out there. And the projects and fund structures are going to relate most often to the countries where those users are. That also means that those users are going to have multiple currencies out there. They may have multiple languages. They may have different tax requirements out there. And so you need an application that's going to be able to go out there and to capture all that information around that and not burden. Again, if you've got someone who's in the UK and you're trying to capture VAT and to see what the exchange from British pounds to euros or to US dollars is, there's no reason for a guy who's never going to leave Northern Virginia to have to see VAT on their expense report. And so we talk about making sure you're going to automate and enforce all those policies, but also make sure that the end user is not going to be burdened by all these processes and all of these controls that you're able to put in place, that it really only applies to the people that it matters to. I was on a call earlier today with an organization, a government contractor, where they're looking for an expense tool, but not everyone in the organization tracks the projects. And so they were looking at to say, hey, is there a way that we have an expense report for individuals that has no projects and for the folks that have projects that has projects out there? And we said yes. And therefore, we're creating a process that's easy for the end user and not having to enter that information. This particular organization was global. They had no real workflow out there because they were using a third-party tool that only allowed them to have one level of workflow. So they had to decide whether it was going to go to a department supervisor or go to a project manager out there. And so they wanted to have multiple levels of workflow. The integration, I talked about kind of weak integration with accounting, is that what they didn't have is a dynamic bidirectional integration. So when we set our application up with like Sage Intacct, as Bulin was mentioned earlier, an organization will set up those dimensions and that data is going to flow over in our application. When they change it, it's going to be automatically updated. So again, the organization's not having to load files or check data, that you're just a nice seamless bidirectional flow of data between, in this case, Sage Intacct and DATABASICS. And therefore, what it allows is the user to enter his or her data, it gets approved, and it moves right back into the accounting and payroll system without anyone really doing anything. And so again, this organization was looking for better integration. And because of this process, they really didn't have any reporting out there. And so they were saying, we'd love to be able to get to report and see data as it relates to a specific project and fund. We want to see what the employee cost is. We want to see any sort of expenses out there. So what we ultimately did, they deployed our time and expense and lead management tool. It integrated with Sage Intacct and ADP. And in this case, actually, the integration was between Sage Intacct and ADP. So we were just passing data to Sage Intacct, and Sage was passing data to ADP. But again, there was a bidirectional data process. They automated workflows, and they were able to have a project approval and a departmental approval, so they could have multiple people review time and expense. It enforced policies. So things like if someone wasn't allowed to submit alcohol on an expense report, it would correct that and capture that data and be done. And then ultimately, it's real-time data. So if someone was sitting here in the US and they wanted to see what took place in Africa as it relates to the specific country in a particular project fund, they didn't have to wait for timesheets or expense reports to be submitted. They could basically real time, assuming someone had entered his or her timesheet for today, they could come in here as we sit, in this case on the East Coast on a Wednesday afternoon. They could see what took place within Africa or Europe already for Wednesday, as those folks have hopefully gone home and gone to bed. But they could see that information as they sit here at 2:45 on Eastern time looking at that information. And so again, they created a process that they were able to effectively automate all of this. And it wasn't rocket science, just a matter of basically making sure they had a good tool in place, tightly integrated, and then were able to distribute all those reports and data they wanted to look at. Now, you notice there, I talked about report distribution, which in this case, before AI, we thought it was pretty slick that we could go out there and push reports out to managers. So if you want to do a credit card reconciliation, you could say, hey, let's do it every Friday and send it out, and it would send a nice pretty Excel spreadsheet out to someone or a PDF. And again, that was neat technology 2 or 3 years ago. Today, what they're looking at is to see how they can evaluate our particular tool, which is the DATABASICS AI tool, which we call DB. And again, I'll show you that same credit card reconciliation, how I can do that there with an AI without having to wait for it to be emailed to me. And again, this is just a matter of embracing and recognizing technology is going to continually change, and there may be better ways to do some of these things. So this next one, before we jump over to demo, I think this is just a question about coming over from the teams here, just seeing if you'd like to be contacted for more information after this presentation. And with that, we've got just a couple minutes left here. Let me jump over, and this is the toughest part of this, which is I'm gonna jump into my demo. See if I can get out. And can you still see my screen there, Bulin?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So again, we've got a couple minutes left here, and what we want to do is kind of show you what we've been talking about here. So this is the DataBasics time and expense application. We talk about we started this conversation talking about compliances and best practices and items like that, and ultimately what we're going to give end users is a nice, clean dashboard and web interface. Something that allows users to very quickly, in this case, I can see my PTO up here. So I can see right now I currently have 27 or just over 27 hours of PTO there. I can also come in here very quickly, and we're talking about like my time off. I can sit and see my accrual process. And again, for those of you that haven't automated your leave management process, we talk about best practices. These are the things that I'm able to do, so I can look at my current leave balance. I'm actually taking Friday off, so I can see that I have that, and I can see basically at what rate I accrue time, and I can see what my accrual will look like at the end of the year. And you'll notice there's some vacations in here. I'm also able to very quickly see that I currently don't have any credit card transactions. I don't have any timesheets to approve. That's because I have approved all my users' PTO and all the rest of that data. But what I have is a nice, clean user interface to be able to get to this information. But what I want to talk about here, because we do have just a couple minutes here, is how we're able to leverage AI within our application. And so in this case, I have a question out there. Which I'm asking the application to go out and to say, and I did this just a few minutes before we jumped on the call here today to show you one of these, but I asked our application, you know, who's in the Reston office this week. So this is my local office. And what you're able to see here is using our scheduling tool, the application was able to come in here and to show me exactly who's on PTO and who's in the office. As well, I can see what time they're scheduled to be here within the office. So again, it very quickly went in here and to look for this. It also gave me a question and asked me, I can ask questions. Do I want to know who wants to work from home next week? So it very quickly went in there and asked me information around these details. Now, what I can also do is go out and create some other queries. So let's go and ask it, for example, give me just a second here for it to come up. But I can ask it a question around, credit card transactions. So I can say, you know, who has outstanding credit card transactions? And what you will see here is, again, this would be if you think of a credit card reconciliation, and I could tell it to do a full credit card reconciliation for me, but I'm just asking, I'm just curious because I'm sitting here again on a Wednesday afternoon, who currently has outstanding credit card transactions. And what you'll see here is it will go out and it'll look into our expense database. It'll see all those current transactions. And interesting enough, what you'll see here is you can see it starts showing me some of the transactions. So these are the user IDs out here, and it's not giving me any detail. I could have asked for detail, but it's telling me this Stephen Black obviously has purchased an airline ticket with United. Someone else has got some from the Hyatt. Someone else has got some information from Costco or from credit card Costco. This person's obviously bought me an American Airlines ticket, an Uber transaction. So what you're able to see here is that with just a very basic and quick natural language query, it'll go out and pull up information. And again, what I could do now is I could go in here and say, I know this is Stephen Black. I could say, show me the details of Stephen Black's transactions, and it'll go ahead and pick that up. So again, I won't spend too much time on this, but it's the same sort of query you can do against the database to say, you know, does anyone have expense reports where they didn't submit receipts? Or does anyone have an expense report where they had a transaction greater than $100 where they didn't submit a receipt? So again, there's lots of parts of this process these days that if you guys haven't looked at that we can leverage technology to quickly and easily go out and to capture this information. Right now, our AI tool is just really an administrative function out there. But as you look into the end of 2025 and early 26, you will also see this start to work on the end user side, where again, if you with your mobile device, instead of having to open up your timesheet, you can open up, in our case, what we call DB, and you could say for Monday, put 3 hours in for project X, put 4 hours in for project Y, and 2 hours in for project Z. Oh, and by the way, use my PTO balance for Tuesday through Friday. and basically close your app, and it will create that entire process out there. So again, where we're going is pretty exciting. I think where we've been certainly has created a lot of processes and controls that have helped organizations. But again, where technology has taken us is really going to be interesting here moving forward. With that, let me go back to my presentation here for a minute. I think you got a couple slides here, Bulin, to wrap up, right?
Yep, I think we just have a few minutes left. So, just wanted to mention, as you might know, folks are joining. We are very active when it comes to doing these thought leadership presentations. So we have a few that are coming up. Unlocking the power of Excel with Sage Intacct reporting, and that is we wanted to showcase Velexo. It's a reporting tool that sits on top of Excel. What's really unique about this session is that it's not just a one-way integration. Velexo has an ability to push data into Sage Intacct, so that should be pretty interesting. So that's next week. The what's new in Sage Intacct R2. So R2 is already out, and this session is going to go over the what's new features that was just released. So that's on June 5th. And then we have the in time for funding uncertainty, agility is everything. That's really covers focuses on the budget management solution Vena. And that's on June 24th. And we provided a link here where you can sign up. It's really at the JMT website under events, and then you'll see these webinars. So we're looking forward to see everyone. And finally, we love to hear from you. We're constantly, talking to nonprofits and folks like you to get insights on areas that you want us to present. So if you have any suggestions, please send them over to us, and we provided an email address right there. Feel free to send us any topics that interest you. And we actually don't have any other questions, Chris. So wanted to thank all of you for attending. I wanted to thank Chris. Thank you so much for doing this presentation. It was terrific. I'm super excited. We were very excited about working with DATABASICS. And yes, just wanted to thank everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in future presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Bulin, for having us. And again, anyone has any questions, obviously you can reach out to Bulin, or my contact
Yes.
details are there, and we're happy to answer any questions for you.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.